All right, so we've set the two endpoints for our market analysis. We've said we know how to work with and deal with perfect competitions, which is where there are so many sellers it's just ridiculous. And we've looked at the opposite end of the spectrum and said, okay, what's the least number of sellers you can have? Monopolies. We now know how to deal with those, at least to some degree. All right, so we need to figure out what's going on in the middle. All right, so the two middle points that we're going to deal with are really, we're only going to look at two different generalizations of markets. So I'm not going to get too carried away here. But there are two different ones that we will deal with. One of them is a monopolistic competition. So it's a competition, but it's kind of like a monopoly. And again, I will get into describing what that means in a second. And then the other type of market, which is now closer to the monopoly side, is an oligopoly, right? So if mono means one, guess what oligo means? More than one. It actually means like a few. And we will get to that one after we go through monopolistic competition. All right, so the one we have dealt with the most often is really this one, monopolistic competition. So monopolistic comps or monocomps. Whenever we're describing a market, we go through the three characteristics. So the first is, how many sellers are there? Well, there has to be competition going on here. So there can't be a few sellers. There have to be a bunch of sellers. So what I tend to say is lots of sellers, but not lots and lots and lots of sellers, right? 3 lots means that there's lots of lots. If there's only 1 lots, then there's just lots. So
farmers, you need lots and lots and lots.
Exactly. But if I said fast food joints, I would only mean lots. All right? So the key here is less than a perfect competition, but still a whole bunch of them. All right? What that number is exactly, whether it's, hundreds, thousands, 50, again, we're walking into the murky middle world, folks. So that actual number, can't really give you an actual number. All you'd have to do is have at least a decent amount of competition. All right? The other thing then is what type of product it is. When you have fast food joints competing against each other, nutritionally, what's the difference between fast food joints? Almost nothing. They all satisfy food cravings, and that's pretty much all there is to it. But what happens for us is that we care about the nutritional value of these things in some fashion because they tell us to. So in a monopolistic competition, the way you differentiate McDonald's from Joe's hamburger shop at the end of the street is because McDonald's will spend a whole buttload of money sending you advertising, where Joe's hamburger shop is going to say, "We're awesome. Hi, stop here, please. We're local. Don't you want to support local business?" Right? And that works. Yeah. And theoretically, they'll taste better. Why will they taste better? Well, because they didn't get their meat from a big, huge box that says meat on it, right? But that's not necessarily true. It's just that you don't actually see them getting the big, huge box that says meat on it, right? I mean, it's hard to say. Now, the last thing that has to be defined is how easy is it to get in and out of the market? Well, it can't be as easy as a perfect competition, but it still has to be relatively easy. So let's go with that. Let's go with relatively easy to go in and out. And think not as easy as a perfect competition. Right, at the end of the season, a farmer just has to plant different crops to get a new crop the next season. If you want to get into the fast food market, you can't just buy some seed and plant it in the ground and have it grow up and be a McDonald's, right? I mean, it takes a little bit of work, right? You're going to need some capital up front to pay for the franchise. You're going to need to do some, some hiring. You're going to need to do some supply analysis to see where you get your potatoes from, where you get your big box of meat from, where do you get your milk from, all those sorts of things, right? But it's not impossible to do, right? I mean, it doesn't take long, right? How long does it take to put up a McDonald's building nowadays? Yeah, not even that. It's probably down to 3 months nowadays, right? They can just, bam, there you go. It's up. Now you can start competing, all right? So the idea, though, is that it does take a little bit of work, a little bit of effort, but it's not as easy as hopping in and around in a perfect competition. Now, we have to decide what happens because of this. So normally, what was number 4? Price. Do we set the price, or do we have to take the price? Yeah, it's kind of a little bit of both. The key here is that on this one, it's like a monopoly. Technically, you get to set your price. But we'll talk about how you don't really get to, or you can to some degree. Take a peek, all right? So, there's a little bit of that going on in there, except think about it in a monopoly, right? When we were in a monopoly, what was our product? Unique. Could we substitute it for anything? No. In a monopolistic competition, are the products different? Sort of. We're not exactly sure. They say they are, right? If you go to McDonald's, they have better food than Burger King, right? I mean, exactly, because if you want a flame-broiled burger, it's better than if it's on a frying pan, because the 70% lean meat is better burned with a flame than with a metal burning piece of... Does it really matter? Question mark, not really. But the key here is, think Chapter 5. What was Chapter 5, folks? Chapter 5 was elasticity. What did I tell you about the shape of the demand curve when you're elastic versus inelastic? Steep means what? Inelastic. Flat means elastic. Well, what makes you elastic? What's the number one thing that makes you elastic? What was the number one thing? No, well, that always happens. But what was the number one thing that makes you elastic? You guys have already forgotten Chapter 5 entirely. That's true. Why do we lose revenue when we raise price? What do people do when we raise the price? When McDonald's raises its price, what does everyone do? They go somewhere else. They find substitutes. The number one thing that drives our elasticity is substitutes. Are there substitutes in these monopolistic competitions? Yeah. Hell yes! There's lots of sellers, right? They're producing the same thing, more or less, right? I mean, you could try and say that pizza and hamburgers are not the same thing, but
when you're hungry,
they're pretty much the same thing. Fast food and this. So when I draw a demand curve for monopolistic competition, I'm not going to draw it as steep as I do for a monopoly, right? This is my demand for a monopoly. I'm not in a monopoly anymore. I'm in a monopolistic competition. My demand is now more elastic, all right? But the key is that it's still downward sloping, right? It's not as elastic as a perfect competition. In a perfect competition, what does the demand curve for a firm look like? Yeah, it's perfectly elastic. It's flat. For a monopolistic competition, we have a little give and we have a little take. Because we can tell people that McDonald's is better than Burger King, and then even though McDonald's prices are a little bit higher, people may go there anyways. Why? Because they told you so. And unfortunately, we listen. All right? Or fortunately, depending on how you look at it, right? I mean, if you own a McDonald's franchise, you want people willing to buy your food regardless of what the price is, right? Okay? And they do, right? I mean, it's part of the deal. Now, our question then is, okay, how do we profit maximize?
Marginal revenue meets marginal cost.
Marginal revenue equals marginal cost. This is always true. Okay? Doesn't matter. All of our markets are going to profit maximize where marginal revenue equals marginal cost. Okay, so we need some cost in here because now we want to talk about profit. What are my cost curves going to look like? Are they going to be different than they were before? No, they really aren't, right? So here's my average total cost. Here's my average variable cost. And here's my marginal cost. So I have my marginal cost. What am I missing? Marginal revenue. Well, what did we do in a monopoly to get marginal revenue? Bisected the angle because we had a downward sloping demand curve. We have another downward sloping demand curve. Guess what we're going to do? Hey, what do you know? Great idea. So this one works the same thing as a monopoly in that sense. Bisect demand to get the marginal revenue. It's just that now, in the monopoly world, your angle is going to be really small. In the monopolistic competition, your angle starts to get a little bit wider. All right, so your angle isn't as steep. There's your marginal revenue. So the cool thing about it is that it really, from a graphing perspective, it's exactly the same as a monopoly, except flatten the demand curve. That's at least nice, right? You don't have to learn something new. This is good, right? You just do the same thing, except you have to remember, make the demand flat. All right? So, to get that profit maximization point, where do we look? Here's our marginal revenue hitting marginal cost. Please remember that this sets the quantity. How do we get the price? Go up and hit the demand line, right? So, doesn't change. Here's our maximized price. Are we making a profit in this particular industry right now? Yes. Why? Because the price is above the average total cost. Perfect. This is economic profit, right? So, you, in your infinite wisdom, right? Let's see. How many McDonald's and Burger Kings and whatnot are there in Milton? One McDonald's, one Burger King. Do you think those guys are making an economic profit right now? Probably are. Probably are. All right. So if they're making an economic profit, what do you expect to happen? Well, the prices, if they're making a profit, right, they don't necessarily want to increase the price. If they're at their maximization point, they're happy, right? They don't want to necessarily raise the price because then they'll have to cut their quantity even more, and then they start outpricing you from the market, right? Ooh, why would there be more competition? Because it's still relatively easy to get in, right? There's probably room in the Milton downtown area for another building, right? Yeah. Or there's a vacant building that you could convert into, say, a Wendy's or a Hardee's or an Arby's or a Pizza Hut or a... Keep going, right? There's a bazillion of them to pick from. So if these two guys are making profit right now, and especially if those two guys are probably the same guy, which distinct possibility it could be, right? That there may be a third one coming in there, right? So now the question happens when you start getting a competition, when the supply grows, what happens? Now well, exactly, but now how are we going to in this graph? Now remember, in the perfect competition world, we had the overall market and the individual market. And you know, we could sort of say the price changed overall, and that's how it changed the individual. Here, we don't... Why does the line become more elastic? Essentially, but What makes things elastic again? What's the number one thing? Options, substitutes. So when a new person shows up and starts competing for you, there's more competition, there's more substitutes. What happens to your demand line? It flattens out. And it has to drop a little bit because now you're dividing all of your competition or all of your product between 3 companies instead of just between 2. All right, so the shift in a monopolistic competition really happens internally, all right? Now, don't draw this on your graphs. Just watch this, okay? Because this gets really messy. And you're never going to have to reproduce this. I just want to show it to you, okay? So please bear with me. All right, so what's going to happen is that our demand line, which used to be sort of steep, but not really steep because there were 2 competitors. We at least had substitutes. And again, there was probably, you could make your own type of things, and there's the weekend charity event, and they're going to sell burgers because that's what they can do, right? Because there's only 2 burger makers in town. So what happens is that our demand line, instead of being that high and that steep, it has to get divided by 1/3. And so what it does, again, like I said, don't draw this curve yet, please, is it flattens itself out and it drops a little bit. So here's our new demand curve. Because we had to face more competition or have more options, we got more elastic. We had to flatten out a little bit. And since we had additional competitors, we didn't have a maximum amount that we could make that was up so high anymore. It had to drop down because now there's 3 choices instead of just 2. Marginal revenue goes down with it, right? Because now we're going to have to bisect this curve. And our quantity is probably going to change a little bit. Probably not too terribly much, though, but here's our marginal revenue. It dropped a little bit as well. You're still going to profit maximize right here now. Where are we going to go to get the price? Go back up to demand. Ooh. What happened to their profit? They got less. Why? Because the price dropped, right? Our price used to be way up here. Now it's right here. Here's our maximizing price. And how high above the average total cost curve is it? It's not at all. All right? And so what we see is that in the long run profit, nope. Now, there's a caveat on this particular answer, though. Short-run profit will last longer. All right? Remember, in a perfect competition, it's very easy to get in and out. Right? So when you make money selling corn one season, there's a good chance you're not gonna the next, right? And that's why farmers are always hesitant to just plant one crop only, right? In a monopolistic competition, if you're making a profit, your profit can last longer because it takes longer for the competition to get there, right? So probably in Milton right now, these 2 firms that are making an economic profit, they're drawing attention. Right? People are looking at them going, let's look at their tax records again, because when you have a corporation, you have to make those available to the public in general. You guys could go look and see what was their profit last season. You can look it up and say, the McDonald's in Milton made, $200,000. Normally, a McDonald's only makes about $100,000 a year. That's about the standard expected economic profit from a McDonald's. When it's over $100,000, they're making economic profit. So people are looking at that going, And it's really debatable, too, as to whether or not the people who are looking at it are going to open up another McDonald's, another Burger King, or something entirely different, right? What's going to be their deciding factor on those, on whether they open up the same one or something new? they'll do some price cost analysis, but more than anything else, it's going to be, how do our cost curves shoot out? Who's going to give me the best deal when I go to buy a franchise from them? Right? McDonald's is going to say, well, if you want another franchise in the same city, and those two franchises are going to have to compete against each other, what are they going to say? You're going to have to pay more. Because they don't want them to compete against each other. They want them to have nice, happy, mildly economic profit out there so that people are still going to McDonald's and people are happy with it, right? McDonald's doesn't like to compete with itself. Now, the owners, they're thinking, wait a second, but if we're both making $100,000 a year, who cares, right? But the problem with it is that McDonald's needs you to update and constantly spend money on the franchise. And what does McDonald's want to do for your franchise price? They want to jack it up, right? McDonald's corporations wants to charge you more than $50,000 a year in franchise prices. And in order to do that, they need to make sure that they're not competing against themselves. So normally, corporate headquarters won't let you open up another one in a city unless there's a viable demand available. And that the two of them you open won't compete against each other.
And the population numbers.
Right, they have to be population densities and distributees. All right? So the key, though, is, unfortunately, in the long run, no, it's not going to be profitable. Now, again, it takes a while to get there, but this is the way it's going to look in the long run, is that, note, you are not at the minimum point of your average total cost curve, right? You're not making economic profit, but are you being efficient? You're being as efficient as you can be? Are you spending all of your money only on producing your product?
No.
What are you spending it on? Advertising. That's absolutely right. And so what happens is that when a company is moving into a market like this, and the other two companies have to figure out, how is my demand going to become more elastic? They have a choice to make. They can when they have more competition. Normally, when you have more competition, what do people do with their prices? They got to lower them, right, so that they can compete against their competition. What they can do instead is say, I'm not going to lower my prices. What do they have to do to try and keep their demand up when they don't lower their prices? They have to tell you that their product is better so that you'll keep buying it anyways. What they have to do is create product loyal, if I could spell the word, product loyalty, right? That's what they want. When they convince you that their product is so much better than everybody else's and you'll pay for it even if the price goes up, what they're doing is trying to convince you that your demand is inelastic. Keep the elasticity where it was. So instead of having this flatten out, keep it steeper. But yeah, you're going to lose a little bit to the competition. But as long as we have a steeper demand curve, we can charge a higher price and you'll still pay for it. And we'll still make our economic profit. Okay? Eventually it's going to disappear, but that's the idea. You have a choice, right? So let's keep it over here. Number 7. Are we efficient? Kinda. Not as much as a perfect competition, but way better than a monopoly, right? Because we have to compete, so we have to actually figure out how to make our burgers the cheapest possible way we can. We have to figure out, pay them as little as we possibly can, right? Because that's what keeps our costs lower. That's what efficiency is all about, right? And I know that sounds yucky, but again, remember, all we care about is being the business owner and making money. We want money, 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 right? All right, so, but better than monopoly. And then that last key, this is, I don't know if I want to call it a number 8, right? But when new competition arrives, because there's no way to avoid it. If you're making an economic profit, it's going to draw competition. There's no way to get around it, right? Somebody's going to always want to take a piece of your pie. You either accept, there's two C's in accept lower demand and elasticity, which equals lower price. That's your one choice, right? So, I mean, you can basically cave into your competition and say, if you're going to charge 99 cents for a burger, then I'm going to have to charge 99 cents for a burger, right? Who's the first one that came up with a $1 menu? Wendy's was first, folks.
It was a 99-cent menu.
Same difference, right?
Yeah. But it seems like so much more, that menu.
And that's what McDonald's did, right? They called it a $1 menu instead of a 99-cent menu so that you didn't think it was the same. But it was Wendy's first with their quote-unquote 99-cent Junior Whopper bacon cheeseburger with onions that are 3 years old or whatever it is.
And a baked potato.
Yeah, that's right, because you can get that instead. All right? So that's one thing. You can either accept the lower demand and elasticity or lower price, or increase advertising and keep prices higher. Keep the price. Now, what happens to this graph if they increase the advertising instead of accepting the lower demand? If you have to pay more for advertising, if you are spending more money in advertising to make your goods, your costs shift. Right? So the sad thing is that what I drew here was us having a lower demand, a lower elastic demand, and having our price fall. If you want to keep your price higher, essentially what happens is that you can make your demand stay higher. You can say, hey, wait a second, I'm going to keep the steepness that I had before. But the key, the unfortunate thing is that what moves up to become a tangent to it, just like the other curve, is your cost curves shift up. And you're still going to wind up at that point where you're still not making any economic profit. You can charge a higher price, but the extra spending you have to do to charge that higher price doesn't do you any good.
Well, are you taking out ROI out of it?
Yeah.
How do you speculate that?
Well, I mean, that's the idea is that if you advertise well enough, if you're really good, if you come up with a jingle that nobody ever forgets for 30 years, then you can keep your prices higher, and you won't lose as much of the demand as you thought, and you may keep some of your economic profit a little bit longer. You're never going to keep it forever. There's no way. Even if that jingle really kicks ass, eventually people are going to forget all about the 2 beef patties, special sauce, lettuce, cheese, onions, pickles, and a sesame seed bun, right? Or people are going to forget where the beef came from.
When we start looking at increased advertising, then we have to look at what's the return off of that. And does it calculate in or doesn't it?
And the whole point is that from an economic perspective, the ROI is not going to make a difference. So the amount of money that you spend on the advertising is eventually going to get washed into or washed out exactly by the price that you kept higher.
I know Wendy's had it bite them in the butt because they used the actual real Wendy in their commercials, and people went, oh, I'm going to get heavy eating Wendy's. So then they switched over to a thinner redhead.
Thinner Wendy.
Like Wendy.
Again.
Our dad was never a small man either.
No,
True.
David Thomas was not
But
skinny.
we can eat from a guy, a big guy that knows how to cook, can't we?
Right, yeah, it's okay. But if you, yeah, not from a woman though, apparently. I don't understand you buyer people. I don't get it, but I'm a seller. All I do is make the stuff, right? All right, so again, the key here is realizing the two different options. Now, I'm not going to ask you to try and put those two graphs together. That's silly. But what I do expect you to be able to do, or to at least recognize, is that in the long run, you don't expect economic profit. And what that means is that when you draw your flat demand curve, your average total cost curve is going to be tangential, which is a great word. I love it.
If you're a mathematician.
True. Or it only intersects this curve in one point. That's what tangential means, in case you didn't know. That's the long run analysis, right? That average total cost and the price you're going to charge are going to be equal, right? No economic profit. Eventually. All right? So when you do the overall analysis, right? When you look at here's your marginal cost and here's your marginal revenue, right? This is what you expect to happen in the long run, that eventually that price is going to drop or rise, depending on how you look at it, to hit your average total cost curve and make it so that you don't get long-run economic profit. Sad but true. Again, if you're a business owner of these types of things, right? And it's a noted fact. I mean, I have a friend who has 3 or 4 McDonald's out in Northwest Indiana, where I grew up, and their average profit per year for the last 25 years has been $100,000 every year. Right? I mean that's what McDonald's actually told them, is that's what you should expect per year, $100,000. So when they were making more than $100,000, they were like, "Wow, this is great! They're so awesome." What was going on? They were making economic profit. What happened in Northwest Indiana in the next 5 years? McDonald's popped up, Wendy's popped up, Hardee's popped up. What happened to their profit? Went back down to roughly $100,000 a year. Right? It actually dipped below $100,000 for 2 or 3 years, but that was because the market was oversaturated. What ended up happening? All the Hardee's went out of business. It was cool as it was economically, for me, it was really awesome because it was just exactly what I would have predicted, and you could see it happening in this own little space that I was growing up in. It was why I actually finished my economics degree. Right? I took the first 2 years of economics courses, and I was like, oh God, this is such dry, boring crap, and math is so much better. I was like, I don't want to do this anymore. And then I got suckered into it.
You start seeing it work in front of you.
Yeah, and there was just I couldn't stop myself from looking at it and going, oh yeah. And listening to the farm report 4:30 in the morning, you'd catch yourself waking up that early going, oh man, I don't want to get up. Oh, but wait. Corn, $4.55 a bushel. Wait. $18 a bushel. Oh my God! Because he was excited.
You didn't want to try and work on proofs for that?
Well, okay, yeah, there was some of that going on too. All right, this takes us through about half of Chapter 9. I didn't really expect to get through all of it. We will come back next week, and we will talk about oligopolies and Chapter 10. Please realize that the week following that is the midterm, and it is a full 1-week test, okay? So the test is a 3-hour exam. I expect each half to be about somewhere between an hour and a half. I wrote it for the class that meets once a week, and I don't like to give different tests, so I don't want it to be a 1-day test. You guys get to take 50 multiple choice, 10 short answer.
May we leave early then if we finish?
Sure, of course.
Okay.
Yeah. And we'll talk more about that as we get closer to it, but just realize it's there.